Good evening, 12s, and welcome to the Seahawks360 podcast, a Sports Ethos production, where we look at the Seahawks from every angle, every week. I'm your host, Candace Hagens, and as always, it's a pleasure and it's a privilege to talk Hawks with you. So, guys, we have got a very exciting episode today. If you're listening on our general audio podcast, today is the first day we're going our ever first YouTube live stream. And it is super exciting because we've got a ton of breakdown. And as we approach this draft process, I just felt like there were too many draft prospects, so much information from the combine measurements to the size measurements to the statistics, their strengths and weaknesses, so much information, guys, that I just couldn't give you all of that over audio without having sort of any visual aid. So this is especially for you guys. I really hope you'll enjoy. We have a lot to get into on today. So we'll be beginning today our series I like to call With the Blank Pick. And essentially the concept is just that for the Seattle Seahawks, we're going to go through each and every one of their picks, starting with today, the number 5 pick. And we're going to go through my favorite picks, some of the draft picks that I think will be best for the Seattle Seahawks and why. We're going to go over some even unexpected picks because if you know anything about the Seattle Seahawks, you know when it comes to draft time, Pete Carroll and John Schneider always do the unexpected. And so we'll get into what those scenarios could potentially look like. We'll get into some of the popular picks, right? What are the things that people are most often saying the Seattle Seahawks are going to do? And what do I think about them? And also, we'll go over some of the things that I don't like. So we'll cover it all here on Seahawks360, as we always try to do. If you're not a Seahawks fan, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate your support. It can't mean enough to us. And I think that you guys will still get a ton out of today's episode because Seahawks can't get all the draft picks, right? That we can't get everybody that I'm going to go over today. It's just not realistic. And so it's still a great opportunity for you guys to learn about some of the prospects that may potentially be on your team and have an informed opinion with if these players are called when your team is up, when it's time for your team to pick. So there is a really exciting show today. We got a lot to get into, guys. So let's get into it and talk some Hawks. So, as I said, we're starting our series, and today we're going to start with the 5th pick. And I don't know how much of you guys listening have background. Like I said, some people listening may not be Seattle Seahawks fans, but you're interested in the draft and the draft process. That's fine. So let me explain how the Seattle Seahawks managed to go to the playoffs last year, but still get the 5th pick. Well, it all started with a generational trade when the Seattle Seahawks last summer decided to trade Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, and it lit the NFL world up on fire. Most people expected the Seattle Seahawks to tank. They thought that they would be one of the worst teams in the NFL, and they expected that the Denver Broncos would go on to be Super Bowl contenders, and even in a tough AFC conference, they were still rated as one of the best teams in their conference. High expectations, especially in Denver. If you ask Denver fans, my husband is one, they would tell you they fully expected to win a Super Bowl or to at least be in contention for one, and it did not go that way at all. Russell Wilson had a terrible year, and he ended up being one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. And I kid you not, you don't get the 5th pick by having one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and the Seahawks looked like they traded him at the exact right time. And so now, in addition to Drew Lock and Shelby Harris and Noah Fant and all these other assets, they got all these other, they were able to draft Charles Cross, left tackle last year. They were able to get so many draft picks last year that they really used as a strong foundation to put them into playoff position last year in what was supposed to be a rebuild year. And so now the Seattle Seahawks are in the extremely unique position to be able to draft the first pick courtesy of the Denver Broncos and still be able to be in playoff contention and know that they're still in win now mode. So really, this 5th pick is franchise breaking. It can really change the trajectory of what this franchise looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So this is a really important pick. So we're going to spend the whole episode on this pick. I'm not always going to do one pick per episode, but just because the 5th pick is so monumental, guys, it could be so life-changing for this franchise. It's got to be given its focus. And this is a particularly interesting draft. In my opinion, it's one that is not really top heavy. It's not a lot of heavyweights, but there's a lot of great depth. So we'll have more time to go into some of that great depth as we get into those later rounds. But for the time being, we'll spend a lot more time on each prospect than I will as we continue through this series. So what I'll do, like I said, I told you guys I got some visual aids for you. So we'll talk about the prospects. I want to start off, though, with our popular picks, right? Because there's been so much talk about what the Seahawks are going to do. Seahawks have never really been involved in the draft talk as often as they are now, because they're just in one of the most interesting positions in the draft, I feel. To start the draft, there are really 4 top quarterback teams, but the Seahawks have re-signed Geno Smith. So it's gotten this interesting question around, are the Seahawks even in the quarterback market anymore? Is this an opportunity for them to draft a quarterback for the future? Because quarterbacks don't grow on trees. So that's very much so a huge question amongst the league. That's one direction they could go. But they also had a terrible defense last year. The defense really struggled, and specifically the defensive line. Their run defense was one of the worst in the league, and it was a tough watch. Take it from me. And so they're really in a position where they need to increase the defensive line. But the 2 top non-quarterback prospects, one will likely be off of the board because their division rival, the Arizona Cardinals, are picking at pick number 3, and they too have lost valuable pieces on the defensive line. They're really in a position where they kind of need to rebuild around Kyler Murray, who is right now rehabbing a torn ACL and probably won't be able to play through most of the year. But they lost J.J. Watt, who just retired. They lost some key pieces, and they really need a defensive lineman as well. Now, they could go in a different direction because they have, to be honest, just a lot more holes than the Seattle Seahawks do. So, yes, they could go in a different direction, but we'll talk about this a little bit later, but, they're more than likely going to take the top non-quarterback prospect, and that leaves what was considered to be the second best non-quarterback prospect in Jalen Carter, who's had a lot of issues, and we'll talk about him soon. But it's really this interesting place where the Seattle Seahawks are really this wild card at number 5, and there's so many different scenarios. But the most common picks that have been experienced, or that if you look on different mock sites like CBS or Mel Kiper, these kind of guys, they're telling you these are the popular picks. And so let's kind of go through that. I'll show you guys. I've got visuals for each playoff contender, and we'll go from there. So let's start off with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson is considered one of the most popular quarterback prospects, or really he's not the most popular. He's the most explosive. So this is a guy who doesn't have much experience starting. He only played really 13 starts is what he did in his time in Florida. He is probably the most inexperienced quarterback. In some time, really, there are not a lot of quarterbacks that are going to go this high or be ranked this high in terms of being like a top 5 pick. But because of his explosiveness and just the athlete that he is, he has exploded on the scene, especially in his first game. He looked absolutely unstoppable. Now, as the season went on, you begin to see a lot more of his flaws. So let's go through and let's talk about this guy in depth. He is 6'4", 244 pounds. He got arms of 32 inches, 32 and 3/4, as you guys can see. He's got big hands at 10 inches. He's just an athlete. And he's got the speed to match. As you can see, he went a 4.43, guys, at 244 pounds. That is absolutely elite. At his size, it's DK Metcalf-esque, but at the quarterback position. And that, as you know, can be absolutely lethal. He is considered a freak athlete to the finest. He is still super young. He's 21 years old. He's got a lot to learn, not only just because he's so young, but just because he doesn't have the experience that all these other quarterbacks have. He really only had his time in Florida, and he was really up and down in that performance. Now, as you can see, when you look at his stats, you can see 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, not impressive, especially when you look at his accuracy, only 53% completion rate, not great. He really does struggle with accuracy, but a lot of people and scouts, and if you look at his tape, you can really see that it's not that the guy is just an inaccurate quarterback. He's just not consistent with his mechanics. And a lot of that has to do with not consistently starting. He just struggles sometimes with his footwork, and the footwork leads to poor mechanics, and that makes the ball not able to go exactly where he wants it. He still needs to learn things like layering his throws and things like that, where he doesn't always have to throw a bullet pass if it's a short intermediate route. Like he can add some touch, like adding touch to his throw. So a lot of things that he can learn, and really be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think he's the quarterback with the highest ceiling. So if you're not familiar with the draft prospects, the top quarterback widely considered is Bryce Young, who may or may not go number 1 overall because the Panthers have now moved up. They've taken the number 1 pick. They may go for a guy such as CJ Stroud, who played for Ohio. And that guy was a little bit more, let me go back to, you can actually see me here as we talk. But so the CJ Stroud is considered, some people consider him the better quarterback because he's got more size. Bryce Young got the most talent, or has proven the most, I think, in being diverse. He can throw on the move. He's shown more of what he can do, I believe, than CJ Stroud has. But his size is very concerning, as he'll come in as one of the smallest quarterbacks in the league, if not the smallest. In fact, I believe he would be the smallest, because the smallest right now is Kyler Murray, who's rehabbing a torn ACL. Not great. Not great if you're looking at it from that perspective. But Kyler Murray is a guy who's been injured. He's been able to play through those injuries. But Bryce Young is, I'd say, and he weighed in at 204. He's not going to play at 204 pounds. He's not going to play. That's not his playing weight. His playing weight, I believe, is barely, maybe 190-ish, somewhere in that range. That's less than Kyler Murray weighs. And so that's one of the biggest question marks with Bryce Young. Pretty much the only question mark with Bryce Young. As a result, he's going to go either number 1 or 2, depending on what the Panthers prefer to do at this point. He is considered the best quarterback, though. Then you got him and CJ Stroud are your 2 top-tier quarterbacks, can't miss type quarterback prospects. You got more project guys like a Will Levis, who has a lot of NFL tools, who has played in an NFL system, but he struggles with accuracy as well in decision making. Now, a lot of people, including myself, give him a little bit of credit because he did not have a lot of tools and weapons to work with. He really had a terrible offensive line, and he didn't really have a lot of, wide receivers. He just didn't have the weapons. It was an NFL scheme, but tough conference, not enough weapons, not enough talent around him for him to really shine the way that a CJ Stroud had, or the way that a Bryce Young had. He wasn't able to get that, so he had to make the most out of what he had. I think he developed some bad habits that need to be kind of undone when he gets to the NFL, but he can start for you. He's not going to be great starting for you. You expect some rough patches if you're going to put him in day 1, but he's a guy that can get you there. And then we go back to Anthony Richardson, who I'm telling you about, before, and he's the guy who, he's got the highest ceiling. He can be a superstar in this league. He's a Cam Newton type of comp, right? Because he's just so explosive. Look at that vertical, 40-inch vertical, almost 11-inch broad jump. The guy's just incredible. He's a dual athlete, right? So he's going to do more for you than just pass, right? In fact, he's more explosive as a runner at this point than he is as a passer. Now, he has the arm strength. He can do whatever you want on the football field. So he's not limited by arm strength. He's widely considered a Lamar Jackson type of elite runner with a better arm. So his upside is even higher than even a Lamar Jackson was, and that's an MVP player in this league. He's got good pocket awareness, so he knows when to step him in the pocket versus run. He does have good awareness with that. You can see as he began to start more games that he began to get more confidence. He began to fix some of the issues with his mechanics, become a little bit more consistent, and was not as turnover prone in those last 6 games as he was when he first started. And really, when he gets those mechanics down, you can see the accuracy. You can see he's got a real tight spiral. He's got a quick release. He can really process the field. Not extremely well. He's still trying to learn how to, I think he can read coverage as well, but he doesn't understand pre-snap reads or recognize them. He's not had enough experience to do that. He can make his first or second read. Sometimes he struggles when he gets to his third and fourth read, I think sometimes, depending on what the defense is showing him. But he has shown the ability to be able to process and go through reads. It's just been inconsistent, right? I've seen flashes of him saying he played that well, and others where he completely denied. Like he didn't process anything well, or he took off when he shouldn't have taken off, running, that kind of thing. So, but then, like I said, he's a guy with weaknesses. He's got accuracy issues due to that poor footwork. He needs to work on his timing, I think. Sometimes he takes too long to go through his progressions. Sometimes he could tend to throw into danger. He's got confidence. He's a guy who's highly confident. He can throw sometimes into the wrong area, just force a throw that shouldn't really be there. Again, I talked about this before, but pre-snap recognition, and then layering of the throws will go a long way with him. In fact, I think you'd see a huge increase in his accuracy if he just learned that every pass does not have to be a bullet pass, right? Every pass doesn't have to be 100 miles per hour. If he can learn how to do that, that'll go a long way to improving his accuracy along with his footwork. So the stuff that he has an issue with, they're very coachable things, and that's what makes him worth the overall fifth pick. But he's not a pick that I like for the Seattle Seahawks. He's not, because he's a project, and I love his upside. If the Seahawks pick him, I'm not going to be angry. But the Seahawks just signed Geno to a 3-year deal, and while they can get out of it at any time, that to me that signifies they're in a go for it now. They're in a win mode now. They were just in the playoffs last year, so why they should all of a sudden decide we don't need the playoffs? we're gonna try to focus on the future. I mean, I get it. But here's the thing, and I know a lot of people like this pick because it would kill two birds with one stone. You'd have your franchise guy for now to play while Anthony Richardson learns the game, learns the system, learns the NFL, etc. Right? But one, there's only so much you're going to learn without true reps, right? So that learning has to be done just through experience. And you can do it all day in practice, but it's not the same. So there's that caveat people always say, and I always feel like that's never said, right? Keeping in mind, there's no substitute for live reps, and he's not going to theoretically get those for a year or two. I feel they're not going to release Geno for at least 2 years. Yes, there's an out, but they love Geno, and even more so, they love that Geno bet on himself. The way he structured his contract, it's incentive-lative. He actually took an extremely low cap hit, only $10 million in year one, and he really made it team friendly. I think the Seahawks, knowing their culture, they're going to reward him and at least keep him around for 2 years. So the guy's not going to get any meaningful reps for 2 years. And I just don't know how well that's going to work. Another thing that people forget to consider when they're talking about how Anthony Richardson should be the pick for Seattle. Well, again, if he's not playing for the next 2-3 years, is Pete Carroll even going to be playing? I mean, his contract could be up in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. John Snyder's contract ends in 2026. So yeah, these guys are thinking about the future, but Pete Carroll especially cares a lot more about the now. He cares a lot more about what they do now and winning now than he does what happens 5 years from now. And so I'm not sure how much sense that makes for them to take their biggest asset they've ever had. They've never had a pick this high in the Pete Carroll, John Snyder era. They have not had the number 5 pick. The best they've had is number 15, with which they took Bruce Irvin. That's not something they've ever had. So they'll take their one opportunity to put it on a player that may not even be able to help them in the next 2 to 3 years. Maybe, but I'm not buying it. It's a popular pick. Again, I'm not mad at it because I understand the logic, but it would just surprise me because it's them kind of punting on their future. There's question even about the Seahawks ownership. Like there may be a change of ownership in the next 2 to 3 years. There's so many things that I just would be surprised if I saw them make this pick, because it's a long term in a situation where they can't necessarily afford to focus as much on the long term, given their success and given just where their job status is right now in the potential flux and ownership that may be happening here soon in the near future. So that's my take on Anthony Richardson. Another popular pick, though, is Jalen Carter. And a lot to get into with Jalen Carter, ton to get into with that guy. So let's do it. So we talked a little bit about Anthony Richardson, but Jalen Carter, again, I talked about this earlier in the podcast, but he was, even before the playoffs, Jalen Carter was considered the best non-prospect in the draft. Now, it was a little bit debatable between Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, but he was the guy. A lot of people said that he was a dominant force, that you couldn't duplicate what he provides on the field. His talent was absolutely immense, and I don't disagree with any of that. He is an extremely dominant defensive tackle. He's only 21 years old. He was Georgia's best. A lot of people feel like he was Georgia's best defensive lineman last year. But at that time, a lot of other people, first draft picks, Jordan Davis, etc., came out of Georgia, got picked early, and most people still felt like Jalen Carter was really the star. He's got excellent arm length, as you can see. He's got big hands, great size, elite size. Now the production was not really there for him. A little bit of context, if you're going to look at this, you're going to say 3 sacks. That's not really a lot. Now, look at the 31 quarterback. That is elite. But he didn't have a lot of pass breakups, not a ton of tackles for losses. One thing to keep in mind with Georgia is they rotate their guys a whole lot. They are always rotating their defensive linemen, and so the opportunity for production is not going to be there as much as it will against other. If you look at other schools and comparing their production, like even to a Will Anderson. Now, I still think Jalen Carter could have been a little bit more productive, and I think some of that comes into some of the weaknesses I see in him. But overall, as a prospect, I don't think you can get much better than what he offers. On the field, he is super elite. He is super agile, excellent change of directions. His ability to shed blocks is great. You really can't see him, like he draws double teams because he's not a guy you can just single block and get away with it. He punishes you anytime you're going to single block him. And so the rest, he's a guy that is a multiplier. And the Seahawks in particular have not had a multiplier in a long time. And when I say multiplier, I mean this: a guy who, when you put him on the defensive line, is going to cause so much attention, double teams, etc., that it gets other guys open, that it makes other guys better, like a Draymond Jones, like a Darrell Taylor or Nwosu. Uchenna Nwosu, he's our defensive end if you don't follow the team. Guys like that will be better because they'll have single block opportunities. Last year, the best player on the defensive line was Uchenna Nwosu. He was a guy getting the production more consistently. He was a guy more consistently getting pass rush, and he was good in the run as well. So he was the best player. And at some point, he began to be double teamed, and other guys weren't able to take advantage of that. What the Seahawks have done in free agency is upgrade some of they've gotten a free agent in Draymond Jones, who used to be a Broncos player last year. He was considered the second best defensive player in the market, outside of Javon Hargrave, who is older, cost more. So I think the Seahawks did very well in signing Draymond Jones, the younger guy with more upside, with less money. And what they're going to do is that by them making moves already, if they were to draft a Jalen Carter and the attention he would eventually begin to get in the league, that would free up a Draymond Jones, a Uchenna Nwosu, and then the entire defensive line can eat and be way more productive. That's huge. And there's really not, you can't put that on a scouting sheet per se, but when you think about projecting into the NFL, if he can take what he did in college and apply it on the NFL field, it does wonders and completely changes the trajectory of an entire defense for that reason. He's very good in run defense. He has extreme power. Like this guy, even when he has a pretty good pass rush plan, but a lot of times he doesn't know how to finish those pass rush moves. He knows how to start them but not really finish them the way he needs to. But what he ultimately ends up doing, if you look at the film, is just, let's say his spin move or swim move doesn't work. The rip move doesn't work. So he's just going to bull rush his way into the lap of the quarterback, and it works every time. So even when the moves don't go his way, he still be able to impact the play to affect the quarterback, to get the quarterback, if nothing else, to move off of their spot, because he uses his power to win. And there are not many players you can say that about. For most players, when their pass rush plan does not work, that's it. He's a guy that I was already familiar with twists and stunts. Georgia used him in those a lot. That translates to the NFL, and that's another reason why he's a day one starter. He's well-rounded enough. He can do all that you ask physically from a physical perspective. But the reason why Jalen Carter is controversial, he was considered like the number one player in the draft, guys. And now the Seahawks are almost certainly going to have an opportunity to take him at 5. The reason it's controversial is because he's had a lot of issues surrounding himself. I've never seen a player drop their stock quite so quickly as Jalen Carter. And the day of the NFL Combine is really well, let me start. I'll go back. If you're not familiar with Jalen Carter and all of the issues that have been happening with him, Todd McShay had a report that was out during the college season, actually, and it was something along the lines of that Jalen Carter had character issues, right? That he didn't quite get into detail on that he was a troublemaker or anything, but just that maybe kind of hinting at work ethic, conditioning a little bit. But he didn't really have a lot of proof. He couldn't reveal any sources. He didn't have any concrete information. So a lot of people paying Todd McShay. A lot of people just said, this guy's just trying to, hurt a player's stock, don't do that. He was criticized widely because there was no evidence. It was unfounded, right? People brushed it off and kept moving. But it came out on the NFL Combine, and the timing was terrible for Jalen. I'll give him that. But on the day of the NFL Combine, an arrest warrant was put out for Jalen Carter for an incident involving an accident where 2 of his teammates, were staff and teammates, they lost their lives. They were racing. Jalen Carter was involved. There was a question about if he was involved with alcohol and drugs or not. It was later found that he was not under the influence, but he was racing. He ended up having to leave the Combine to go back to Georgia, turn himself in, work out those issues. Those were misdemeanors. They weren't ever like big felony charges, just racing. At first, there was a question about if he had left the scene of the crime before police told him. It was later revealed that that was not the case. He did not leave until he was told by the Georgia police, the Athens police, that he could leave, which was good, at least. And he was able to get things worked out where he pled no contest, which is different from not guilty. He pled no contest. He ultimately was given community service. He'll be on probation for a year, etc. So that's now resolved, but it was not a good look for him on Combine Day to have all of that happen, really. I mean, he didn't mention a lot. The word was he did not mention any of this possibility to the few teams he had met with leading up to his to the information about his arrest coming out. So it made it seem like he was hiding things. It was just not a good look. And I think people, especially given the misdemeanor, especially given that, he ultimately didn't leave the scene early, I think people could have overlooked that. There would have been concerns about maturity, most certainly. But people would have overlooked that. I think there'd still be a question about if the Arizona Cardinals would have taken Jalen Carter or Will Anderson if it was just the legal concerns. But then Jalen Carter has his Georgia Pro Day, and he works out, and he comes in 9 pounds heavier than he was at the Combine just 2 weeks earlier, guys. Just 2 weeks earlier. And that's not good to gain 9 pounds in 2 weeks, knowing that this pro day is the equivalent of one of the biggest interviews you'll ever have in your life. It was extremely disappointing for a lot of people to even see just that, right? That is a huge red flag in and of itself. You're not conditioning, you're not working out, you're not taking the pro day as seriously as you should, especially given you already gotten so many question marks and red flags around you. Well, he decided to still do some of the drills. He started doing the positional drills. He did not do any of the combine testing, like he didn't do the 40-yard dash, 10-yard dash, anything like that. I don't necessarily knock him for that, but now watching him do the positional drills, I better understood why he did not do the combine testing. And it was bad, guys. You can find it on the internet if you want, but he looked slow. He was out of breath. He couldn't even finish doing the positional drills because he was cramping. He was breathing heavy. He was drinking water. He ended up taking off his shirt. You could just tell it was weighing on him. It just, the conditioning was an obvious problem. Now, I will give the caveat that he's obviously been through a lot, this young man, in the past couple of weeks, especially. I understand how that could take a toll on your mental health. But if that's the case, don't do the drills. Like, the 9 pounds heavier would have been a red flag. The issues he's already had before would have been a red flag. But he would have been able to move forward. But it's just those 3 things on top of each other makes it really questionable. And I got to be honest. Guys. If it was up to me, I'm not sure I would take Jalen Carter. I was excited about Jalen Carter as a prospect for the Seattle Seahawks team for a long time. I was big on him. If we could have gotten him, it would have been heaven, because he is exactly what the Seahawks need on paper. But my main concern came in during the pro day. And I'm concerned that he's no longer even on the Seahawks board for this reason. As talented as he is, potentially a generational talent, as talented as he is, Pete Carroll is a guy who on principle is a show up and compete guy, right? Everything is about competition, and he's not the kind of guy who's going to help you be competitive. He's going to take the competitiveness you already have, and he's going to maximize that to help you get the best out of yourself. That's how he coaches. That's his coaching style. He needs guys to have an innate competitiveness in them, because he uses that to help motivate his players. If you don't have that competitiveness within you, and Pete Carroll says it all the time, you're either competing or you're not. And that his pro day performance was not competing. It was the opposite of competing. So it's really sad to see that happen to him, have that embarrassing of a pro day. It really could have helped his draft stock, and I think solidified him as a pick if he would have been able to at least do well in those positional drills. I mean, even if you gained the weight, but you did the positional drills pretty good, we can overlook that. They overlook a lot of things for a talent is talented as Jalen Carter is. My personal concern is not only about the conditional aspects, which are real, but I think you can fix those. To me, if you're not willing to put in the work, unless you have to put in the work, there's been rumors now that he's not really a good practice guy. He's not really a guy who, they kind of had to be on him about that kind of thing, about his work ethic, the maturity, the decision making, things like that. They just weren't there. And for me, if you're not a guy that's going to put in work to be conditioned, nobody said this. I haven't heard this before, but I think what people miss in terms of why I'm most concerned potentially about taking Jalen Carter is that leads to injuries. Yeah, you can come in and not play. You can come in, if you're going to play in the NFL, you got to play your hardest. If you're going to play in the NFL and you're going to be great or even good for that matter, you have got to be conditioned, be in shape. You can't just hop out on the NFL field. You get hurt. And so then the number 5 pick would have spent all his time injured because he's not doing what he needs to do in order to stay on the field. I see this very much so. My biggest concern is that he is more of a Zion Williamson of the NFL, an elite talent guy who when he gets on the field is dominant, but can't stay on the field because he's not conditioned. He's not healthy. That's my biggest concern. People aren't talking about that because he hasn't had a history of injuries, and that's fine. But what you did in college isn't necessarily projected in the NFL. And what I know about the NFL is you got to come hard, and you got to come with your best, and you must be in shape. Or these guys, you'll tweak something, hamstring. I mean, there'll always be something, right? If you're not doing what you need to do on a regular basis, if you're not internally motivated to be in the best shape, to go out there and give your best. If he can stay in shape, if he can do the conditioning, he'll be excellent on a football field. I have no concerns about that. I really don't. He's as big of a sure thing as you can get, I think. I mean, his floor is a quality starter. That's the floor for him. Seriously. I mean, the floor is he never reaches a Pro Bowl, but he's a solid starter for you, who helps in the pass rush, helps on run defense. He goes unnoticed in the NFL. Maybe he's not a star, but he's good. That's his floor. That's huge. And Seahawks could just take that. Honestly, they could just take that at that point. His ceiling is Warren Sapp, if you ask me. I mean, that's really his ceiling. He's the kind of guy. Now, I feel a couple of reasons why I'm more on board with this pick. It's a popular pick, but also, despite my concerns, I'm going back and forth with this in my head, but despite my concerns, I think I'm okay with taking Jalen Carter if the Seahawks have done the work, if they've looked into his background, if they've found that they feel like they can get this guy motivated. They've talked with him. They've interviewed with him. They like what they hear. They feel like he's a good kid and he just needs direction. I'm on board. You're not going to hear me be pissed if they draft Jalen Carter. In fact, I'm probably excited because I'm just going to trust that the Seahawks are going to make sure it's not a Malik McDowell situation and they draft somebody who never plays for them or is a complete bust. Now, Malik McDowell, if you don't follow the Seahawks, was a second-round pick for the Seahawks, and he never played a snap for the Seahawks. He got in an ATV accident, being stupid, dumb, and it just caused them, never to play a game. What you risk in this case with Jalen Carter is, he's on probation still. So if he does something stupid, immature again, then we might be talking about jail time. With him being on probation, if he violates his probation, it's a tricky situation to navigate, most certainly. Seahawks feel confident about it. I feel confident about it. And I feel better, too, because the Seahawks signed Hall of Famer Bobby Wagner. He is back on the defense, and that's the kind of guy you would absolutely need on your defense. If you're going to get a player like a Jalen Carter needs to understand what it looks like to be a pro. And there's no better example of what it looks like to be a true professional in the NFL than Bobby Wagner. So with that being said, I'm back on board with the pick. Yes, it's a popular pick, but also it's one of my pick. It's not my first pick, but it kind of is. I don't know. I still go back and forth with I got two guys that I feel like are the best picks for Seattle. It's Jalen Carter and it's Tyree Wilson. And so with that, let's talk a little bit more about Tyree Wilson because he's gone a little bit unnoticed under the radar, and I think he can add just as much to the Seahawks team as maybe not Jalen Carter, but I think he is really close. So Tyree Wilson, absolutely in love with this guy. He is 6'6", 271 pounds, super long arms, 35 inches. He's 23. He's an edge prospect, and the Seahawks still need that. He would probably be a defensive end, kind of a 3-4 prospect. He wouldn't be a nose tackle, but he'd still be on the interior line. He'd be able to rush from inside. I believe he'd be able to do that pretty well. In his 2000 season, you see he got 7 sacks, 9 quarterback hits, 14 tackles for loss, 61 tackles. Big, good production out of Texas Tech for him. As you can see, he's got elite size. That's without question. He's great at block shedding, which is really important. So you'll see me mention the block shedding. That's huge for me if a player can block shed, because that was a huge problem, especially on our D-line and linebacker, the front seven. They just get stuck on blocks, and then just the offense will be able to do, the opposing offense will be able to do whatever it wanted to do. But he's got an explosive first step. He's an excellent tackler. He does have good agility. It's not great agility, but it's good. And what I love most about Tyree Wilson is he can be placed all over the line. Like, he can play on the inside. He can rush out on the edge for you. He's not a great guy to drop in coverage, but he can still, do that if you need him to do that. He's too small to play nose, but he just gives you a lot of options with where you can place him and what he can do. A lot of versatility, and the Seahawks are looking for that, as much versatility as they can get. Now, he does lack some of the bend, and that's the reason why he can't solely be an edge. I think he's better maybe in the interior, bulking him up just a little bit, maybe get him to like 280, 285, something like that. He's got the frame to be able to hold the weight, so I'm not really concerned about that. I know he'll be able to have on that weight, but he lacks some bend. He does have bend, but it's just not an elite bend. It's not a Von Miller anywhere near like that where he can just, pin his ears back and just get to the guy. He can get a little stiff sometimes. Like, you can see his movements aren't that stiff. His pro day is going to be really big for him in terms of his stock. Whether he'll stay stay in this range, he might even drop, depending on if he doesn't show that he has that short area quickness, or if he doesn't show like really good bend. That'll be important. He could use some improvement with his hand usage. He's pretty good with it, but in terms of counters, when you get him, after his first, initial hands. He can be pretty violent with pretty violent hands, but if a guy is more technically savvy, he can kind of get stuck. He doesn't have any counters. Sometimes because he's so tall, he can tend to play upright. And his main thing is just needing to learn how to time snaps. Sometimes he can mistime those. Those are very coachable things. He's not very good in zone, as I mentioned that. But all the other things, I'm not really worried about. His weaknesses are extremely coachable. The only question mark about Tyree Wilson that's not coachable is the bend, right? Like his stiffness. I don't know if you overcome that, but he's so fast and powerful that I just, I kind of don't care. Tyree has great character though. Excellent character guy. And so if they went with Tyree Wilson over Jalen Carter, I completely understand. I have no questions about it. Jalen Carter is more the type of player that we need, but if you don't feel like the guy's going to be able to play for you or because you think he'll get injured or because you think he'll be in trouble all the time, I don't think that you should draft him. I mean, it's just that simple. So I'm good. Those are my top two picks, Tyree Wilson, Jalen Carter. Let's get into the unexpected picks, right? The picks that I think that they're not likely to happen, but could happen, right? Within the realm of possibility. The first unexpected pick is Will Anderson. Candace, why is Will Anderson an unexpected pick? I talked about this before. The Arizona Cardinals need defense. They need particularly defensive linemen. They too are short on defensive linemen. JJ Watt just retired. They just got a new GM. They just got a new coach. Kyler's out. They need something to keep the fans engaged. Will Anderson would do that for you. He's a name that people know, people are excited about. He's got excellent character. He's had more production than a Jalen Carter. He's done it, well, he's not done it for longer, but he's just a guy you don't question if he loves football. You don't question his competitiveness. And he's got everything. He's got so much that you're looking for. He would get the fan base excited. And most importantly, take all of that off the table, right? If you're the Arizona Cardinals, some people suspect that because the Arizona Cardinals have so many holes, they may trade down. And that's possible, but that they may trade down to get more picks, to get more players. It's not off the table, but I'm going to tell you why I feel it's unexpected. If you trade down, you're gift wrapping Will Anderson to your division rival. So if it wasn't the Seahawks, that would be the following non-quarterback pick, quote unquote, then yeah, I would agree with folks. They could trade down, get more picks. But I'm not sure that Arizona wants to play Will Anderson twice a year. I'm just not sure they want to take that risk of having a potential, generational talent that they got to go against twice a year. Yeah, they got more picks, more equipped to do it, but they don't have that level of talent. They miss out on that. They passed. And then they'd have to be stuck with it. So it's also because of the whole new GM thing. Most guys want to make a splash. They want to come in and start strong. And I'm not sure Luke Van Ness type of player. I'm not sure a Nolan Smith necessarily is going to give you that same splash as he would if you drafted a Will Anderson. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on him. You guys can see, great edge, great production. He's super young. Really only a few weaknesses. There's so much to his game that he does so well. He didn't run a great 40 time. You'd love to see more, but it's fine. It's good enough. Like, again, it's one of those things where if you got that kind of talent on film, people will look over the combine. They call it a glorified Olympics for a reason, glorified underwear Olympics for a reason. And so that's something that's easy to overlook. But I don't expect the Seattle Seahawks to be able to get access to Will Anderson. Now, let me be clear. Let me be very clear. If by some reason the Arizona Cardinals are stupid enough, and they have to be stupid, if they are stupid enough to pass on Will Anderson and say they're going to get more draft picks and pass on that guy, the Seattle Seahawks should absolutely run to Adam Silver. Don't waste any time. Write down that pick, and they should select Will Anderson. He would be my top choice. Of all the options, he would be my top choice right now. over a Tyree Wilson, over Jalen Carter, if I genuinely felt he'd be available. I don't. I do not think he'll be available. So that's why I'm putting him in the unexpected. But, you never know. Cardinals have been known to do some stupid things in franchise history. So maybe they'll do us a favor and pass on Will Anderson. All right. Next prospect. Next unexpected prospect is Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon. Now, some people like Devin Witherspoon more as a quarterback. I don't like him as much for the Seahawks. I think I like the athleticism and the size of a Christian Gonzalez a little bit more than a Witherspoon, especially for the Seahawks, knowing that they've got Tyreek Woolen, who's already an athletic monster on the other side. Kobe Bryant, who's a little undersized, playing at nickel, maybe either him or Julian Love. But you really want to get big and athletic at that position. I think it will complement Tyreek Woolen really well. The reason why I say this is unexpected, some people will say, why is this unexpected? Especially if you don't know much about the Seahawks, right? You'd say you need a corner opposite of Tyreek Woolen anyway, because Michael Jackson, while he was good, he was just kind of average, right? He had some times where he struggled and could be a liability, but he also had times where he was pretty strong. He just struggled he didn't have any ball skills. So, why would it be strange for the Seattle Seahawks to use one of their top picks and go get another guy, solidify that defense on the back end? Because they've already got a strong secondary with Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, and the signing of Julian Love, right? Well, the reason it's unexpected is because the Seattle Seahawks have never drafted a cornerback higher than third. The highest they've ever drafted a cornerback was Shaquille Griffin in the third round. That's not something they do. Pete Carroll doesn't really feel he needs that elite talent to work with. And he's a guy who can work with. I mean, he made Tyreek Woolen a 5th round pick, Richard Sherman a 5th round pick. Elite guys. I mean, it's still really early for Tyreek, but he's looking like he could be the next Richard Sherman. And that has a lot to do with Pete Carroll's coaching ability. So if you're John Snyder, you kind of want to bet on your coach. So do you really want to waste a valuable pick like that when you might be able to get more bang for your buck in later rounds? That's one reason. Another reason it's unexpected is that the Seahawks play a zone a lot. A lot of their coverage is zone coverage. And you can find a zone corner in the 3rd round, in the 4th round, in the 5th round. These guys that typically are in the 1st round, as you can see, they actually tend to be better at man coverage and press coverage because that's what more often teams play in the league. So these top corners tend to be great at press, at man, and not as good at zone, not as fluid in zone. The zone guys, they go later rounds. And so, yes, this guy is super athletic, super speedy. He's got great change of direction. He can drop in coverage pretty well. He's got some short area quickness. He's great or pretty good in press coverage. Very sound tackler. He's got good pursuit angles, as you could tell. But, he's really not fluid in zone. Zone is not something that it works really well for him. And so, I'm not sure if he's a guy that the Seahawks could really take advantage of. I mean, he is, for all of his strengths, the one strength you need him to have is his one weakness. And I just don't know if that's the best fit. Not going to be mad at the pick. If they did go in that direction, we'll be excited to have a Gonzalez and Woolen tandem. But I just don't think it's the best fit with what the Seahawks want their cornerbacks to do, unless they're going to be changing that and doing more man coverage. That would excite me because you want to see, I think Tyreek Woolen would be great in man-to-man coverage. And would love to see that exercise a little bit more, honestly. So it would be unexpected again, but I'd be okay with it. So now that we've gotten into the unexpected pick, those are the two things I don't expect to happen. Let's take a moment and just talk about trade downs. Trade downs have been a common topic, right, amongst the Seahawks fan base because John Snyder is known for trading down. He does it all the time, almost every year. Last year was one of the only exceptions where he did not do a lot of trade downs. people think it was one of the best draft classes in years, and thus people don't want to see trade downs. Here's what I think. When it comes to the 5th pick, I was team trade down. I'll be honest, because I just wasn't happy with the options. I don't feel like AR, Anthony Richardson is a good fit. Jalen Carter has so many question marks, and those are the 2 guys that I want. Tyree Wilson is a great prospect, but is he worth the 5th pick? I don't know. Maybe more like the 8th or the 9th. If you could trade down to 8th or 9th, you could trade with the Raiders at 7. You trade with the Falcons at 8. You could do that and still get you a Tyree Wilson because you don't feel confident that Jalen Carter is that guy. Then fine, do that. Get you an extra pick, 3rd round pick, because that's where the value is. People will say the value isn't worth it. It's worth it. The argument against trading down is you're only going to get a 3rd round pick maybe for trading back 2-3 spots. The 3rd round is where it's at. The 3rd round is where you're going to get your depth pieces, your quality pieces, and potentially even your upside starters. There's some really good players in that 2nd to 3rd round range. Get as many picks there as you can. That's where the value is in this draft, truly. So that's my counter to those who feel like it's not worth it. It is worth it to pick up an extra 3rd round pick. You can get you a good center in the 3rd round. You can get you another edge rusher. You can get you some pretty valuable interior defensive linemen. A lot of good opportunities. Even some really good zone corners in the 3rd round. A lot of good options at that point. Good wide receivers in the 3rd. I can go on and on. Really good options that fit what the Seahawks need in the 3rd round. If the fit isn't really there in the 1st, like I said, those players that you could trade down for. Oh, well, I'll talk a little bit more. So, as I said, I don't think that they should trade down, and not anymore, because realistically, this is a once-in-an-opportunity lifetime to have a top 10 pick. So if they do trade down, I want them to trade within the top 10. Maybe the Titans at number 11. Maybe. Depends on how the board falls. But let's take a look at some of the guys. I took some notes on some of the guys that if you traded down, here's who would be available and who would be good value at the 10 pick. Jordan Addison, wide receiver. He has potential. I like the idea of getting a Jordan Addison. I like him more at the 20th pick. He may not make it to 20th, but top 10, it's questionable because of his size. He is a run after the catch guy, and the wide receiver that the Seahawks need to get, in my opinion, is a run after catch guy. But he's 10 pounds lighter than even Tyler Lockett. And so I just don't know if that's a good fit. It concerns me about durability. And the Seahawks have had enough trouble with wide receivers who have injury history when it comes to like the back end of their depth. Tyler Lockett and DK have been fine. Knock on wood. They've been fine. But D. Eskridge has been a headache. He's not been able to do anything because he's been so injury riddled. And just other picks just haven't worked out. So we need a guy who can be a little bit less question marks in that regard. And then there's Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson is, to me, DK light. He's big, he's fast, he's physical. We have that on the team. So while I'm not opposed to a Quentin Johnson, I just feel like at that pick, you're already paying DK a lot of money. You're already paying Tyler a lot of money. I just don't think that it makes sense to end up with that very first pick, get a wide receiver when you've already got top tier guys. You don't need more top tier guys. You need depth. And I'm not sure the 5th overall pick is a good opportunity to go get depth, right? It's not good value. So I don't feel like it's there. Talk about Christian Gonzalez. My question with Devin Witherspoon is his size. Again, the issue of the zone. Neither of those guys are good at zone or that excel in zone. How does that really help you if you're the Seahawks, a zone-heavy team? It doesn't. Where's the value in getting one of those corners? It's not there. Jackson Smith, Njigba, I always mix that up. Sorry, y'all. But that's a good guy. He's a great prospect, elite prospect. And I'm not going to be mad if they get Jackson Smith and Njigba. And I'm not going to be upset about that. The thing is, he's a slot wide receiver. That's what he is. I mean, maybe he can be more. He's a slot wide receiver. It goes to value. Is the number 5 overall pick Is the best thing to do with that to get a slot wide receiver? Probably not. And I don't see the value there. Even if he's great. I mean, yeah, you could get a Cooper Kupp type of guy. That's possible. And he has the best chance of being that. But I'm not even sure I trust the Seahawks offense to even put him in the best position to really take advantage of that. You still want most of your touches going to DK and Lockett. You just got to need a guy who can fill in, who can make plays, again, run after catch, who can go horizontal. I'm just not sure that makes the most sense right there. And outside of that, and outside of those guys, then you're talking about guys who you should be talking more about at 15 to 20, rather top 10. So that's why, really once I kind of did the process of elimination, this draft is just strange. The top end talent isn't there for me in the first round. It's really not the top end talent, not in the first round. So with that being the case, I think the Seahawks are best to stay where they are and either get hope and pray that Arizona's stupid and trades down, or they can, get Tyree Wilson, get Jalen Carter, whichever prospect they feel more comfortable getting. Or I think that's best. I mean, they could trade out of the top 10, but I just think that's a wasted opportunity trading outside of the top 10. I'm not sure. Yes, you'll get a lot of second and third round picks probably. And I do agree with the value in that, but I know the fan base will be so upset. You guys will be so upset about that. And I would understand why going from the number 5 pick to going to the number 15 pick is completely demotivating. I agree. And I'm with you. I would be disappointed too. I would be happy about the value that they're getting, but it's hard to be as excited about those players because the Seahawks really do need a difference maker at the position. That's really that's what they need to get them over the top, to be Super Bowl contenders. They don't need depth. They need one more guy. They need a difference maker on the defensive line. And then everything else, I think, is a matter of depth from there. So get that difference making guy at the 5th round with the 5th pick, and then use the rest of the draft to fill in those depth, to fill in the holes. And I think it's a really strong roster if they can do that appropriately. So final thing I want to talk about here, final person I want to talk about, prospect, is somebody who used to be mocked often to the Seahawks, but things seem to have changed as people look at more tape, as some of the combine is taking place. His stock has seemed to fall a little bit. So let's go to Myles Murphy. Myles Murphy is a defensive end. I'm not a fan of him. This is my one unideal pick. I just don't see what I would want to see from him, especially at the number 5 pick. I'm fine with him at 20, but at 5, he just doesn't have enough burst, enough quickness. He's got great size. As you can see, 6'5", 268, just a little bit under, Tyree Wilson has a little better size, more arm length, a little heavier, a little taller, bigger hands. So Tyree has the more elite size. He's a step below that, clearly. But the production wasn't there. Yeah, less production. It just doesn't pop out on tape to me. He had a pretty good year before last, but this last year, looking at his tape, he just seems to blend in a little bit too much for my liking. Yeah, he's got a plus motor. He's got a pretty good spin move. He's got really good hand usage. He is good in that way. He's really sound, impressive hand usage when I'm watching him, but he's not explosive. He doesn't change direction. I don't think he's going to test very well, to be honest. He keeps postponing his testing opportunities. He did not do anything at the combine. He did not do anything in his pro day, and I think it may have something to do with injury, but also can't help but feel like he's ducking the testing a little bit. He's supposed to be doing a private workout in April. We'll see how that goes. Maybe that changes my mind. He struggles to get off blocks. He pushes far past the pocket. I feel like for a guy like that, that's more of a fringe first rounder guy to me, with the upside, the size, the traits, but not the production. That's a fringe first round, great value at second round kind of guy. And so I'm not super high on him. To me, it would be unideal to get him. He's just not who I want to see for the Seahawks at this point. Not at 5. Again, they get him later, great. But anyway, so it's very interesting draft for the Seahawks. A lot of things they could do with the number 5 pick. I'm big on Tyree Wilson or Jalen Carter. That's my personal preference. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. What who did I miss that you guys like at the number 5 pick? Do you want them to trade down? Do you want them to stay where they are? Give me guys your feedback. What do you predict is going to happen? In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. We're going to make this a series. So this is not our first episode. Our next episode will be with the 20th pick. We have a lot to get into on that episode. Also, be sure to follow the show at Ethos Seahawks. We got polls, analysis, we get breakdowns of all the information you need to know for your Seahawks. I give you my opinions on news each and every opportunity that comes around. Be sure to download the podcast version of this show. You can find us on iTunes, Stitch, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, guys, that's our time for today, guys. That's it. I'm out. And as always, go Hawks.